In the previous lesson, we established the 4 foundations of VFR. Know what it is, what it can do, control it with confidence, and the importance of information. Now we need to move deeper into the actual practical state of VFR. I mentioned earlier that there are not that many types of clearances to remember and learn, so we will go through almost everything now concerning VFR procedures. First things first, let's go and take a deeper look, namely to the airspace class. Remember, he needs a clearance to do stuff, so that's where he starts. A VFR, when you first talk to him, is normally outside your airspace, contacting you because he needs to get in, or on the ground awaiting taxi. To the beginning of that communication always, and I mean of course always, shall begin with an initial call. It's something you take for granted with IFR because it's very structured, but with a VFR, he can be anywhere and he can ask for anything. You don't really know what he wants, so initial call should always be made. Kettle Tower, Oscar Yankee, Papa Papa Yankee, to which you should respond, Oscar Yankee, Papa Papa Yankee, Kestrel Tower. That's done as the first thing. Then he will lay out his request, and we will now talk about the different procedures in a nice and orderly fashion. We'll split the briefing into 2 now to cover inbound flights and outbound flights. Because while they are very similar in principle, they also have their distinct differences. If we take the situation where he's outside the control zone, he will ask to enter, probably for a landing or something else, to which you need to respond to allow him to enter. It's this phrase here from point 121 in ATS instruction 14. They'll say Oscar Yankee, Papa Papa Yankee, enter control zone via TUBOR 1,500 feet or below for right base runway 22 left. Alright, let's pause now. Maybe you heard that instruction before, but let's now make an effort to really understand what this means. And I mean truly understand. With IFR, you just learn the instruction and then you say them. But with VFR, you really need to understand what exactly you're saying and why you're saying it to understand what the implications are. This is exactly what I will break down here. So we established that he needs to be told what to do. That's what we have here. But we also established that altitude was not a thing for VFR. And why the 2 instructions? Okay, let's get down to brass tacks and understand what this rather unique instruction means, because there is an important lesson to be learned here on the structure. Normally, the first instruction you give to a VFR pilot, except taxi instructions, stands out. Let's forget the last part here for a moment, because we'll come back to that. But focus on this part of the instruction. The first instruction the pilot gets, whether it's a takeoff or he enters your airspace, it needs to be seen as a kind of a basis for the rest of the clearance. It's like a set of ground rules he gets introduced to, which serve as a base where all subsequent instructions that you will give him will build up upon. Does this seem familiar? Maybe? Maybe not. Probably not. But it is actually similar to the ATC clearance you give for an IFR flight. You give an IFR flight an ATC clearance, right? Clear to destination via la-di-da-di-da. That's establishing the ground rules. You go here, you go via this, and then later you guide him through, push, taxi, departure, all that stuff. This is the same. It's just more local. The clearance limit is not some faraway destination in the distant lands intertwined with a big IFR network. No, it's only as far as your own airspace goes. So what is this basis? It's that he's allowed to fly into your control zone. It does not specify exactly where he can fly, so theoretically he can fly anywhere within the control zone. And you also need to specify the maximum altitude he can fly, because, well, you know, hopefully, that above your airspace is a TMA where he's not allowed to enter. The pilot may not know this, or he will not know what the altitude is, so it's important that you specify this basis as well. In Copenhagen's case, as well as the rest of control zones in Denmark, the altitude of control zones is maximum 1,500 feet. So laterally, he can fly within the scope of your control zone. Vertically, he can fly no higher than 1,500 feet. Now that foundation is laid down, and it does not need to be repeated. You can choose if you want to remind the pilot, but it's not needed. You don't give an ATC clearance to an IFR flight several times either, do you? No. Now that we have laid that down, you put on the building blocks. Every instruction you give from here on is specific to guide him towards what he needs to do. Maybe he wanted to go sightseeing over Copenhagen, or fly between the pillars of the Øresundsbridge, or maybe in the case we just looked at, which is, let's face it, the most normal one, he's asking for a landing. So you now go to specify within the sets of the basis boundaries already established what he should do. You're basically building on top of the bases. So that's why you ask him to join right base for 2 to left. Which brings us to the next topic. What is a landing pattern? A landing pattern is square legs that marks how a VFR aircraft should approach the runway. Now you have to remember to stop thinking of this IFR. Forget everything about ILS approaches. The absolute rules of VFR is that a VFR airplane always needs to join one of these 5 legs from wherever he's coming from to join the landing pattern of that runway. Which one he needs to join largely depends on where he approaches the airport from. They are called upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. Let's establish the landing pattern to runway 2 to left in Copenhagen. It can be either right or left, but left is preferred because of all this. But the choice is always yours for easy approach, of course. It consists of an upwind, a crosswind, a downwind, a base, and a final. As you instruct the VFR flight to approach a runway, you specify where you would like him to join this so-called landing pattern. You can basically choose freely, but you should go for the easiest option. In our case, let's see here, Papa Yankee is coming from the north of the 2 ports. So if we draw these 2 patterns, the easier for him would be to enter right there on the right base. And in 95% of all the cases, you will ask a pilot to join either base or downwind. That's what you'll see most of the time. Only if they come directly in the center line would you clear them for a straight-in approach, or if they need for some reason to fly the opposite pattern, then you would join crosswind. Now another unique instruction for VFR flights must be briefed. So we established the ground rules and we told him where to join the circuit. And now as he enters the circuit, we must advise him what number he is in the traffic pattern. This is for his planning to know exactly who to fly behind. This will be much further expanded upon in the phraseology part, which is how to say it, and the traffic information part, and even also the management part. For now, what you need to know is that you need to define what number he is in the circuit. And this is because there's no separation provided, remember? Separation is the responsibility of the pilot. But yeah, so he needs to know who else is in that pattern in order to maintain separation by himself, obviously. So you've given him the fundamental instruction to enter your airspace. You've told him a way to approach the pattern, and you told him what number he is in the sequence after he entered the pattern, of course. And now, at some point, you need to, let's call it, terminate the flight. By this, I mean a landing clearance. A clearance which essentially ends the relationship between you and the plane. And this is pretty much the extent of the clearances you give. Only thing you have to change now is this part. All the time you wanted to do anything differently, you instruct him as he requests or denied if you don't want it. The foundation and ending is laid upon, and it's just now the instruction part to guide him around. And for that, there's not really that much structure on how to say it or anything specific phraseology, except for a few exceptions that will be expanded upon later. The trick, the difficult part, is learning to issue these instructions with confidence, with an overview, and do it in a way that makes your life easy. Come to terms with that you cannot possibly foresee all possible requests from pilots. It's just not possible. So your prime task is to learn how to take your desires for that airplane and be able to put any instruction possible in there to make it happen. Some tips will be given for most common situations in the management part, so don't worry, more will come. So that's the air part for now, and we'll talk about landing patterns as well, really. Now, let's turn to the ground and just go through the departure phase. As mentioned before, it starts with initial call, Oscar Yankee, Papa Yankee, Castle Tower. And it continues with the taxi instructions just like for IFR, and he ends up at the runway. Alright. This is where the VFR part begins. At the holding point, ready for departure. As he reports ready for departure, let's go back to our pyramid. You always start, before takeoff clearance or anything else, outline the foundation, the clearance limit, the ATC clearance. Oscar Yankee, Papa Yankee, after departure, right turn out, leave control zone via VATSIM-Spec, 1,500 feet or below. There. Ground rules are laid. So what are the ground rules here actually? Now again, be careful. This is the ground rules. So after departure, right turn out, specifying a turn to take. This is something with air law and rules that all turns are to the left unless otherwise instructed. his path to the clearance limit, which is at the end of your control zone, and his maximum altitude. Keep in mind, you may need to look at his flight plan to see his direction of flight and determine the most suitable direction for him. You should always specify a path for the flight to fly in order to reach the clearance limit. The point here is to make you understand that here is what you tell the pilot what to do after departure, depending on his request. And this can be anything. Most common example could be after departure, left or right patterns for runway, whatever runway. Leave control zone via whatever point, whatever direction. Join the Lillehammer route for whatever, the VFR sightseeing route over Copenhagen. But as I said a million times now, it can be anything. It can be a pattern to a completely different runway. It can be circling over the bridge. It can be staying in the western part of the control zone. It can be anything. You need to learn to put whatever is needed here and understand the structure of putting in the foundation and putting in whatever is the clearance limit of his foundation. It's not a list of stuff. You must come up with all this stuff yourself, depending on what the pilot is requesting to do. All right. By the way, while we're talking about this, here's a small interesting for you still to learn. When you say after departure right turn out, it's because you need to turn right after departure. If you need to turn left, you don't have to say anything. Then it's just after departure. Because the aviation law states that all turns are to the left unless otherwise instructed, so therefore a left turn is implied if nothing is said. This is a fact, and you just have to learn it. Now, his readback is correct. He gets his takeoff clearance. Then maybe you add report VATSIM-Spec if you like, or something else depending on the situation. And once he reaches the end of the clearance limit, for example, he reaches VATSIM-Spec, then you are going to terminate your relationship with the flight by sending him away. He's outside your airspace, into uncontrolled airspace, and your contact with him has ended. Here you have it. This is how simple the basis of the specific procedures are and which clearances you have to give. Let's recap. A foundation of a clearance for when he enters your airspace from the air, and that's just a slightly different structured one when he enters it from the ground. Then it builds up to an ocean of different options of instructions depending on the situation you must continuously give him as his flight progresses, finishing up with an instruction that terminates your relationship with the flight in your airspace. A landing clearance if he terminates it to land, or a frequency change approved if he terminates it to leave your airspace. Imagine how easy that was. Now, watch this as many times as needed until you really understand what this implies. You may now continue with the lessons. Thanks for watching.